Today is March 17, 2017, and we have been studying the community rule. But before we get into that, let's ask our Heavenly Family to help us to understand things more clearly. Heavenly Family, thank you for the Sabbath that we're now entering into. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for the plan of redemption. Thank you for showing us a way to live in harmony with reality and giving us the truth so that we can live according to it. Thank you so much. Please guide us in our study and discussion tonight to gain a clearer view of the good news than we've ever had before. Sister, please guide us to understand all truth. Help us to see the true nature of the community rule. Help us to learn all the lessons that we can from this. Show us what is most relevant for us now, and really, we want this meeting to be everything that it should be. And we know that we need you to guide us in order for that to be so. So thank you so much. Father and Mother, we ask these things and thank you. B'Shem Tzemach Huahi, in the name of Branch, he and she. Amen.
Amen.
So as we normally do, I'll start with giving a little bit of an introduction to the community rule and a brief summary of our approach in studying it and kind of what we've come to so far. So, as I'm sure most of you on the call know, the community rule is a text that was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was one of the first scrolls found. And for anyone listening to this later, or if there's someone new on tonight who isn't familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, they are an ancient Jewish library that was found between the years 1946 and 1956. And the library contains somewhere around 1,000 individual documents from a Jewish group who lived in the land of Israel on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea in a settlement called Qumran. And these scrolls contain many important texts. The actual copies themselves date from the 3rd century BCE, some of them even before potentially, up until the 1st century of the Common Era. And this collection of scrolls contains the oldest manuscripts of books like Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Isaiah. It contains every book that ended up in the Protestant Old Testament, which is the same as the Hebrew Bible, the rabbinic Jewish canon, other than the book of Esther. It wasn't found. And it is a very important library. And in addition to having the books that made it into the Bibles of Protestants and Jews, it also had some of the books that made it into the Catholic Bibles and some books that didn't make it into any of those Bibles, books like the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch and a couple of the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs. I should qualify, the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch actually did make it into the canons of Ethiopian Jews and Ethiopian Christians, but other than that, didn't make it into any canons. And but there's books aside from all of that. There's the Genesis Apocryphon and a whole bunch of different texts. And then there are the writings produced by the community who housed them. And these are typically referred to as sectarian writings. The community rule is among that latter class. It is a text that was produced by the unique group of people who had these Dead Sea Scrolls. And that group begun in the first part of the 2nd century BCE, founded by an individual known in the scrolls as the Teacher of Righteousness. And there are several texts in the Dead Sea Scrolls which most historians conclude were written by the Teacher of Righteousness, and that includes texts like the Thanksgiving hymns, but there are others as well. And there are certain writings which go back to the early stages of this community, or this, I almost want to call it a movement, this group perhaps that's very general, but it's, I guess clear enough. There's a group of people who surrounded the Teacher of Righteousness, and they continued on building upon his teachings in a sense after he died. Some went in one direction, some went in another. But there's, however many Jews that believed that this individual, the Teacher of Righteousness, had a message from God. And one of the things that is interesting, the group and the texts are all interesting in their own right, but one of the things that should be particularly interesting for Christians or any believers in Jesus, Nazarenes that would be, in addition to Christians, these scrolls have many points of parallel between themselves and the writings of the early followers of Jesus contained in the New Testament and beyond. And some of these parallels are of such a nature that it is clear that the community surrounding the Teacher of Righteousness was in some ways a forerunner to the Nazarene movement. Again, the Nazarenes are the early followers of Jesus from within the 1st century, before they were called Christians. And so it's really interesting, like if you ask questions like, did John the Baptist think that the Teacher of Righteousness was a true prophet or a false prophet? Likewise, did Jesus think that the Teacher of Righteousness was a true prophet or a false prophet? And then you compare the things that come from the Teacher of Righteousness, the ideas, the teachings, the texts, with the ideas and teachings and texts which are, at least in some way, a product of Jesus and the Jesus movement. Well, you find that Jesus and the Jesus movement agreed with the unique teachings of the Teacher of Righteousness. The things that were unique and original to him are things which they considered to be true and very important. Now, they probably wouldn't do that if they considered him to be a false prophet. In fact, it entirely would conflict with the teachings which they actually took from him, particularly the teaching of the two spirits or the two ways, which is the teaching that all things in the world can be divided into two categories, the category of light and the category of darkness, the category of truth and the category of error. So on one side you have terms like truth, light, righteousness, etc. And on the other side you have falsehood, error, wickedness, darkness, all of those sorts of things. And with that paradigm, it's quite clear that the Teacher of Righteousness falls into either one or the other category, because all things do. So either he is on the path of falsehood or on the path of truth. Either he is teaching righteousness or teaching wickedness, etc., etc. And the fact that this teaching comes from him, and that Jesus and John and Paul and all those other early believers, the fact that they actually take that teaching and move forward with it and expand it and so on, shows that they consider it to be true. And they wouldn't consider it to be true if it's from a false prophet, because again, it's not a teaching that he just took and shared with all other Jews or something like that. This is a teaching which was unique and original to him. And the way that he formulated that teaching and the terms that he used and all of that, they're all picked up by the authors of the New Testament and included within those writings. And so from that, we have to conclude that, along with many other things, actually, but these sorts of things certainly lead to the conclusion that John the Baptist and Jesus and the Nazarene movement considered the teacher of righteousness to be a true prophet. So all of that together shows us that the teacher of righteousness is very important, and that most likely the Nazarenes viewed him as a prophet no less than Daniel or Ezekiel or Jeremiah or Isaiah or Elijah or Elisha or any of the prophets. And in fact, there's quite a lot there in the New Testament that shows that there was a heavy influence. But, of course, everyone who professed to be a follower of the teacher of righteousness in the days of Jesus did not agree with Jesus, and Jesus did not agree with them. But it had been about 200 years since his time, and so you wouldn't expect that everyone who claimed, in a sense, spiritual descent from an individual would agree with each other 200 years down the line. In any case, the community rule, being a text which goes back to the early stages of the community which surrounded the teacher of righteousness, that in itself shows that it's a very important text. But there are more reasons why it is very important. One is that it actually, out of all the texts found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it is the one which outlines the beliefs, the purpose, the practice, the self-understanding of the community more than any other. Moreover, it, along with texts like the Thanksgiving hymns, have among the highest degree of parallel with the writings of the New Testament as compared to any of the other Dead Sea Scrolls. And so it's quite significant, quite important, and there are many more reasons, but we won't go through all of that right now. But to mention one more, we've found that the things that are contained within the community rule, at least some of them, contain a striking parallel to what our Heavenly Family has given us as a message in these last days. So when we first read the community rule, and I'm not sure yet if everyone here has read all of it, but I know when I first read it and when some others first read it, it was like, oh man, yeah, that part is really similar to the message that our Heavenly Family has given us, and you know, that was also the case, and perhaps even more so, with the Thanksgiving hymns. But the purpose of the community rule is to bring about the final wiping away of sin, to bring an end to the reign of falsehood in the world, and to bring about the reign of truth. And that is precisely the mission that our Heavenly Family has given us. And so for all of those reasons, we have been studying it on and off for a little over a year. And so far, we have found that it's teaching truth and righteousness in quite a clear way, actually. But we've been focusing on the best preserved manuscript of this document found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it is known as 1QS. It's a particular scroll, it's a particular copy of this text that has 11 columns, and scrolls, of course, don't have pages. It's just one long sheet that has actually been stitched together from several different scraps or pieces of leather. And essentially, it's been written on. The writing has been placed into columns. There are 11 of them in this 1QS, this particular copy of the community rule. And so far, we are partway through the 4th column. And the contents of the columns that we've looked at so far can be divided into 2 basic sections. The first section starts at, of course, the very beginning of the scroll, so 1QS column 1, line 1, and extends to, let me see if I can give you an estimate of where it is. Okay, to column 3, line 12. And that section gives the basic purpose of the community rule and describes what it is to become part of the community, and that involves a covenant with God. And that covenant ceremony was to be done every year, probably at the Feast of Pentecost. Now, starting at about column 3, line 12 or 13, there is another section. And this is the section which is the teaching of the 2 spirits. And it gives this idea that everything in the world is divided into 2 spirits, either the spirit of error or the spirit of truth. So something is either true or it is not true. It is either true or it is false. And it describes these 2 spirits in some detail. It ends up going through their origins and how they are dominated by different beings. They're ruled by different beings. The spirit of falsehood is ruled by the angel of darkness or the messenger of darkness, and the spirit of truth is ruled by the God of Israel and the messenger of his truth, the angel of his truth. And then it describes the ways of these spirits in the world. These are different ways in which falsehood and truth manifest in the world. And so, starting just after the beginning of column 4, it gives a list of things which describe the spirit of truth. And then it describes, after that, the final outcome, what will happen to those who walk according to the spirit of truth. Following that, it describes the ways of the spirit of falsehood in the world. And then, subsequently, it describes what will happen to those who walk in the spirit of falsehood. And where we are right now is in the list of the manifestations of the spirit of falsehood in the world. The last one that we looked at is a slanderous tongue, and the next one is blindness of eye. So, before we get into the specifics, though, what we've typically been doing is seeing if anyone has questions or comments on anything that is more broadly related to the community rule. So that could be something about the community rule as a whole, about the teacher of righteousness, about the community which surrounded the teacher of righteousness, about the way in which any of those things relate to the New Testament or relate to us or anything like that. I mean, it's still related to the community rule, but in a broader sense than just looking at this next aspect, blindness of eye. So, does anyone have any comments or questions?
My question is, did the teacher of righteousness just pop out of nowhere, or was he the part of another movement that that continued on as the community.
So did the teacher of righteousness just pop out of nowhere, or was he part of another movement? And I missed the part that you said. Did you say that preceded the community?
Right? Was he a part of another movement that continued on, as a leader of his movement?
Right. Okay. So that's a very interesting question, and I don't know the answer. And part of the reason why is because not too much is known about the teacher of righteousness. For example, his name. We don't actually know what his actual name was. He's just known by the title, the teacher of righteousness. And there are some things in the scrolls that we can know about him. And it seems to be, like, the way that it's described in the Damascus document, might kind of describe him as being part of some sort of prior movement. And that, let me just go there to the beginning of the Damascus document. So this is what it says, starting from the very beginning. Listen now, all you who know righteousness, and consider the works of God, for he has a dispute with all flesh, and will condemn all those who despise him. For when they were unfaithful and forsook him, he hid his face from Israel and his sanctuary, and delivered them up to the sword. But remembering the covenant of the forefathers, he left a remnant to Israel, and did not deliver it up to be destroyed. And in the age of wrath, 390 years after he had given them into the hand of King Nebuchadnezzar, he visited them. And he caused a plant root to spring from Israel and Aaron, to inherit his land and to prosper on the good things of the earth. And they perceived their iniquity and recognized that they were guilty men. Yet for 20 years they were like blind men groping for the way. And God observed their deeds, that they sought him with a whole heart. And he raised for them a teacher of righteousness to guide them in the way of his heart. And he made known to the latter generations that which God had done to the latter generation, the generation of traitors, to those who departed from the way. This was the time of which it is written, quote, like a stubborn heifer, thus was Israel stubborn. Hosea 4:16. When the scoffer arose who shed over Israel the waters of lies, he caused them to wander in a pathless wilderness, laying low the everlasting heights, abolishing the ways of righteousness and removing the boundary with which the forefathers had marked out their inheritance, that he might call down on them the curses of his covenant and deliver them up to the avenging sword of the covenant. For they sought smooth things and preferred illusions. Isaiah 30:10. And they watched for breaks. Isaiah 30:13. And chose the fair neck, and they justified the precept. They banded together against the life of the righteous, and loathed all who walked in perfection. They pursued them with the sword, and exulted in the strife of the people. And the anger of God was kindled against their congregation, so that he ravaged all their multitude, and their deeds were defiled before him. And then it goes on. So here's the thing. What that describes is that the teacher of righteousness was risen up for those who essentially recognized that they had gone astray. They were wrong. And so they were groping for the way, as it were, as blind men groping for the way. and then they rose him up to guide them in the way of his heart. Now, here's the thing. That gives somewhat of a time frame here. So it describes the, God turning his face from Israel and from his sanctuary, and he left a remnant, but, they basically, the sanctuary and Israel were delivered up to the sword. Well, the time when the sanctuary was destroyed was the year 586. And then it says that 390 years after he had given them into the hand of King Nebuchadnezzar, he visited them, and he caused a plant root to spring from Israel and Aaron to inherit his land and to prosper on the good things of his earth. Okay, so that's 390 years after that. So basically, if you take the year 586 and subtract 390 years from it, you come to the year 196. So, of course, you would subtract because you're going from basically higher numbers in before the Common Era up to the year 1, and you're coming to the turn of the era. And so that's why you would subtract, which is really just going forward in time. So if you move forward in time 390 years from 586, when the temple was destroyed, that brings you to 196. So at somewhere about that time, and someone could say, well, maybe it's a little bit before or a little bit after, because Nebuchadnezzar actually, came against the Jews prior to that, but that's when the temple was destroyed. And then, of course, there's captivity and things that Nebuchadnezzar is doing during then, so people might say, oh, well, maybe it's a little bit after. But it's that general time frame at least, and that's kind of the most significant event to go from. So 196, so it seems to be that there was perhaps a movement of people at that time who recognized, oh man, we've gone astray from the covenant, and we're doing things wrong. We're walking in sin and so on. And they could see that, hey, the children of Israel have departed from the covenant. And so, okay, they're seeking God, and perhaps they were risen up as a movement to follow the truth, but they didn't have a prophet. And it says for 20 years they were groping for, like blind men for the way. So then if you move forward another 20 years, that brings you to about the year 176. And that would be the time about that the teacher of righteousness was risen up. So perhaps he was risen up from among them. Those in that movement, it says from Israel and Aaron. So is it that they were a group of priests, or at least partially of priests? Well, that could very well be. When you read things like the community rule, it talks about the priests, the sons of Zadok, and things like that. It's interesting how at this time in the history of Israel, before this, all the way from the time of David up until this point, the high priests were from among the sons of Zadok. Zadok was the high priest in the days of David and Solomon. So the high priests from that time were all children, descendants of Zadok. And then after this, the priests may not have actually been from Zadok. It's a question as to, well, were the priests of the Hasmonean dynasty actually children of Zadok? Perhaps not. So there's some sort of transition in the priesthood that takes place, and then of course when you get to the Herodian priests, well, then it's certainly not the children of Zadok. So there's some sort of transition of priesthood that takes place right about this same time. And then you have a group of Zadokite priests who are basically at least part of this Qumran community, at least part of the community that surrounds the teacher of righteousness. But it doesn't describe them as necessarily separating yet or starting a group. It might be that they're still part of Israel, but they're just groping for the way. You have those who are searching for 20 years, and then God raises up for them the teacher of righteousness. So perhaps he was one of those who was searching. So he may have been part of a group of priests that recognized their sinfulness and really wanted to enter into a genuine covenant with God. And certainly when you read the Thanksgiving hymns, it is quite apparent that the teacher of righteousness had a deep realization of his own sinfulness and sought God and found repentance. And this, if he was part of a group of priests like that, then that may very well, it may be the case that that's what happened. And then there is also another text that is relevant for trying to understand who the teacher of righteousness was, and it is called the Habakkuk Commentary, or the Habakkuk Pesher. And it's a commentary on the book of Habakkuk, as the title indicates, and it makes reference to the teacher of righteousness and another figure known as the wicked priest. So, for instance, in column 1, line 4, it says, "The wicked is the priest, and the righteous is the teacher of righteousness." And that's commenting, it says, "For the wicked encompasses the righteous." That's from, sorry, I didn't give the correct line. This is commenting on Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 4, part C. And that part in Habakkuk says, "For the wicked encompasses the righteous." And it says, in commenting on that, "The wicked is the wicked priest, and the righteous is the teacher of righteousness." And that's in column 1, line 12 or so. So it talks about the teacher of righteousness there. A little further on, it says, "Behold the nations and see, marvel and be astonished, for I accomplish a deed in your days, but you will not believe it when told." Interpreted, this concerns those who were unfaithful together with the liar, in that they did not listen to the word received by the teacher of righteousness from the mouth of God. And it concerns the unfaithful of the new covenant, in that they have not believed in the covenant of God and have profaned his holy name. And then it goes on, but as you can see, it's interpreting Habakkuk to describe events dealing with the teacher of righteousness. A little later, it says, interpreted, this concerns the house of Absalom and the members of its council, who were silent at the time of the chastisement of the teacher of righteousness, and who gave him no help against the liar, who flouted the law in the midst of their whole congregation. So it kind of lets you know some of what happened. Again, later it says, interpreted, this concerns the teacher of righteousness, to whom God made known all the mysteries of the words of his servants, the prophets, etc., etc. And I'm going to try and find one place. Oh, yes, this is interesting. But the righteous shall live by his faith, or the just shall live by his faith. Habakkuk 2:4. Interpreted, this concerns all those who observe the law in the house of Judah, whom God will deliver from the house of judgment because of their suffering and because of their faith in the teacher of righteousness. So you can see how it really talks about him a lot, and it's something worth studying in order to understand. I'm going to read a few more passages here. Commenting on Habakkuk 2, verse 8, which says, because of the blood of men and the violence done to the land, to the city, and to its inhabitants. It says, interpreted, this concerns the wicked priest whom God delivered into the hands of his enemies because of the iniquity committed against the teacher of righteousness and the men of his counsel, that he might be humbled by means of a destroying scourge in bitterness of soul, because he had done wickedly to his elect. And it goes on, commenting on Habakkuk 2:15, which says, woe to him who causes his neighbors to drink, who pours out his venom to make them drink, that he may gaze on their feasts. It says, interpreted, this concerns the wicked priest who pursued the teacher of righteousness to the house of his exile, that he might confuse him with his venomous fury. And at the time appointed for rest, for the day of atonement, he appeared before them to confuse them and to cause them to stumble on the day of fasting, their Sabbath of repose. So it seems that the teacher of righteousness was driven away in some sense by this wicked priest into exile. And so someone said, okay, well, maybe the teacher of righteousness was a priest who was overthrown, like perhaps he was even a high priest, or at least a priest, who was overthrown by this person called the wicked priest and was driven into exile. So that's, a little bit of indication as to who the teacher of righteousness was. Was he a part of some group? Well, he may have been a part of a group of priests who were really searching for the truth, and then he had a revelation. He was met with, he gained a knowledge of the mysteries of God, but people refused his message, and he was driven into exile. And evidently, there were those who went with him, and he started this group that became known as the children of light, or the children of Zadok, or at least the children of Zadok were leaders in the group. So the children of light, later by outsiders at least, they were known as the Essenes. So I know that doesn't fully answer the question because it's not really known yet, but that at least shows us a little bit of what happened, and I'm sure studying these things more will reveal it more.
That's very interesting. Thank you. And we've seen things like that happen in the days of the latter prophets too.
Yeah.
They were talking to wouldn't accept them, and they were driven away had to start their own.
Sad but true, indeed. So are there any other questions or comments on things more broadly related to the community rule? Or are you guys ready to get into the next manifestation of the spirit of falsehood in the world?
Ready.
Ready.
We're ready. Okay, sounds good. All right, well, the next thing here is blindness of eye. Blindness of eye. What do you guys think? Does anyone want to explain what they understand that to be referring to, and if they think that it's really part of the spirit of falsehood?
I have just Matthew 6:22 through 23 says, the light of the body is the eye. Therefore, if thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thy eye be evil, the whole body shall be full of darkness. Therefore, if the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? It's just that, I guess the eye is used for receiving light, understanding, gaining knowledge. And we know that Laodicea, of course, one of their characteristics is that they're blind, and that they need to get eye salve. And the eye salve, from what I understand, is the spirit of prophecy, because we really are blind. I think all of us are blind without the Holy Spirit leading us and guiding us. And that's why you need a guide and a leader, is because you don't know where you're going. And so those would be my comments on that.
I got a comment on that. When we're trying to love the world and our eye isn't single, we're not 100% for the Lord. It causes us to be blind. The Lord can't bless us.
Something that came to my mind, and it may not have anything to do with this, but there's a saying, turning a blind eye. And since this is a manifestation of falsehood, if you turn a blind eye towards something, that means you see error, and for whatever reason, it could be a number of different reasons, you turn a blind eye to it. Would that pertain to this?
Well, in the sense, of course, it deals with the figure of speech that's referring to blindness of eye. And so in that sense, yes. So turning a blind eye to something is basically like acting like you don't see it. Yeah, ignoring it, pretending that you don't see it, that sort of thing. And that, of course, is illustrating the fact that the phrase blindness of eye refers to not really seeing something, at least not seeing something as it is. And we've talked about this before on the calls, how darkness is such a perfect symbol for error or falsehood, and light is such a perfect symbol for truth, because light enables you to see things as they really are. Darkness prevents you from seeing things the way they really are. If it's dark and you're looking for something, you may very well not find it. Why? Because you might not even see it. And even what you can see, if you can see anything, like if there's any amount of light, but it's still mostly dark, it's really difficult to discern things properly. It's just really, it's really hard. But when things are nice and bright, when things are full of light, you can see things a lot better. And so, with error, you can't see things the way they really are. You're not viewing reality as it is. You are viewing it contrary to how it is. But when you have truth, you're viewing things the way they really are. And why is that? Well, it's because truth is simply the mental picture that matches the way things really are. And so it's a perfect symbol. And so if someone has blindness of eye, it means that they are not perceiving things the way they really are. So one thing that I find interesting is the connection between this and what we just read from the Damascus document, that being describing the condition of these people who were groping around for 20 years like blind men for the way. So the way that it puts it here, this is from Damascus document, column 1, around line 10. And they perceived their iniquity and recognized that they were guilty men. Yet for 20 years They were like blind men groping for the way. So they're looking for the way, but they can't find it. They're just groping for it because they can't see things the way they really are. They're viewing things wrong. In other words, they have error, they have falsehood rather than truth. And then God rose up for them, the teacher of righteousness, to guide them in the way of his heart. Now, understanding that the symbol of blindness, having blindness of eye, is actually simply a symbol for having falsehood rather than truth, not having truth, but instead having falsehood, well, then it becomes quite apparent that, yeah, this is certainly a manifestation of the spirit of falsehood in the world. It's, in fact, a very direct manifestation of it. So any other comments?
Just along all the same lines, but just to tie it into the principles, if we've got false principles that we're living our life by and believing to be true, then, they can't coexist with true principles, the principles of truth, and, it just causes utter confusion.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe to expand on this a little bit more, sometimes it's very obvious to us how bad it is for people to perceive things other than how they really are. Sometimes it's so obvious that it's so dangerous and so bad because the consequences may be immediately felt. Whether that is someone being drunk or high on hallucinogenic drugs and seeing things differently than how they are in a very literal way, like I'm talking about visual perception, and then they end up driving their car into a building or off the road somewhere and dying or getting someone else killed or whatever. That's a pretty immediate, drastic instance of blindness of eye, in a sense, perceiving things perceiving things other than the way they really are. And those sorts of examples can be helpful to realize, yeah, this is a big deal. But it can happen in so many different ways. I mean, you could have circumstances. I'll give an example. In Numbers chapter 5, there's the ordeal of jealousy. And, it's when a man suspects his wife to have cheated on him, basically. Well, I mean, that's just an example of, hey, what if he's wrong and he perceives it in this way and then he acts on it and he kicks her out of the house or whatever and the family falls apart because of his false perception. That's really a big deal. To give another extreme instance, you could have someone who is losing it mentally, and they're perceiving, and what that really means is that they're perceiving things other than the way they really are. And that's an example could be someone who thinks that, someone's always watching them and someone's, coming after them or whatever, or the government is coming after them, and, they're literally just high-strung paranoid all the time. And they act on that, and they, and there's really nothing there, let's say. There can be things like that are obvious examples, and when people have a case of seeing things or perceiving things other than how they really are, when someone has a case of that to an extreme level, that's when they're institutionalized. But notice that is just taking that same principle further than it is for most people. And just so long as someone takes that principle only to a more usual extent, they're not considered insane. But really, any degree of that is insanity. And anyone with a blindness of eye has a certain degree of insanity, because insanity is just viewing things other than how they actually are. And so we have to understand that blindness of eye, perceiving things falsely, is actually a form of insanity. And we need to really take it seriously, not to allow ourselves to view things in a way that's contrary to the way they really are. We have to really search for the way, find the truth, because it's not going to do us any good to believe lies. And so, I'm sure that many examples could be given that we can learn something from, some perhaps more subtle. And, it could be as simple as, the Jews in the time of Jesus, they had a certain perspective on what the Messiah was to be like and what he was to do, but their perception was wrong. And because of that, when Jesus came and said the things that he said and did the things that he did, and it didn't match their perception, they ended up being upset with him and upset with that circumstance, and it escalated to the point where they took part in bringing about his death. At least those in Jewish leadership, some of those in Jewish leadership. And that's really a big deal. Someone could end up getting killed because of misperception on a doctrine. If someone misperceives the principles of how to come to a knowledge of the truth, it can lead to awful things. The Inquisition is a great example. Galileo was subject to the Inquisition, and he even had a mild punishment. But the inquisitors were basically agents of the Roman Catholic Church to subdue and put an end to any sort of heretical movement or heretical influence. And when people said things or taught things that were contrary to the established doctrine, they were viewed as heretics, worthy of eternal damnation. And so Galileo, he perceived things according to how they really are by simply looking out into the sky. And, of course, he did so with the use of a telescope and noticed some things that people hadn't really noticed before. And just by stating his observations, which happened to be contrary to the teaching of the church, which was actually founded upon the ancient conception of the way that the world was, and that ancient conception is recorded in the Bible, and they didn't distinguish between the ancient conception and the message of Scripture, and so to them, Galileo was contradicting the Bible, and in a sense he was. But it was just an observation of material reality. And because they had a misperception of how to come to a knowledge of the truth, and even what it means for something to be true, because of their misperception of that, they sentenced him to a life of house arrest, and countless others they ended up actually killing because of their so-called heretical ideas. So perception makes a huge, huge difference. I'll give another example. And this is hopefully helpful for all of you guys in practical life. what you might misperceive sometimes is exactly what the temptation of the devil is. So you may be tempted to think a certain thing, but you may think that you're actually being tempted on something that you're not. So for instance, let's say there's someone who you know who's doing something bad, or who you at least perceive as doing something bad, and you are bothered by it, and you are angry with the person, and have some sort of hate arise in your heart toward the person. And I know that sometimes people don't like to think of themselves as hating someone, but if you're angry with someone, if you dislike someone for anything other than righteousness and for the sake of others, and if that hatred is not absolutely founded in love, well, then it's not just hatred. It's not righteous indignation. It's just hate. And so if you are viewing another person negatively and all of that, you might think, oh, the devil's tempting me to think that they're doing this thing. But maybe that's not the temptation. And if you misperceive that, you could end up not having the victory. Because sometimes the person might be doing something wrong, and you might actually be perceiving that part correctly, and the devil might actually be just tempting you to hate them because of it, when really you shouldn't. Maybe you should have sympathy for them and love them even though they're doing something awful. And in that instance, your misperception, you're viewing things contrary to reality in regard to what the temptation is, could lead you to struggle all the more, because you could be there and, I must be being tempted to think that this person's doing that, and then you're trying to defeat the temptation, but really, in trying to defeat the temptation, you're trying to lie to yourself to say that the person's not doing that, when they might be doing that, and it might just be that you're viewing it wrong, that you're upset about it when you shouldn't be, that your reaction to the reality is something other than what it should be. So it's very important to perceive exactly what the temptation is. In other instances, it could be that perhaps the person is doing what you think they're doing, but perhaps it's not wrong, and you think it is wrong. And maybe that's the temptation, to think that what they're doing is actually wrong when it's not. Yeah, I mean, there's many ways in which the devil could be tempting someone. He could tempt you to view someone as doing something other than what they're doing. He could tempt you to view what they're doing as being of the opposite character as what it really is. Or even if you see things the way that they really are in terms of what's happening, he could tempt you to respond to it in the wrong way. There's all those different aspects, and it's so important that you perceive it as being what it is, so you don't end up trying to counter the temptation by countering the wrong thing. So misperception is a serious thing. But enough of talking about the misperception and how detrimental misperception is. How about how beneficial viewing things the way they really are is? This is so important. So let's start with these sorts of examples. Let's say that someone is actually guilty of a horrible thing, and you see it, you know what it is, and let's say you were tempted to be hateful towards someone because of it, but you recognize the temptation, and you claim the promises of our Heavenly Family to view things only in truth and in love and righteousness, and you defeat that temptation. Well, guess what? If you pray and say, Heavenly Family, show me what exactly the temptation is and give me the victory, and they show it to you, which they will if you ask and you're willing, then you can have victory over that and actually love the person and help them out of their error. whereas before perhaps you couldn't. And maybe that would be a friendship that you would never have been able to have if you're constantly viewing the person wrong. Ellen White talks about this a lot. If you read the Ellen White 1888 materials, one of the main things is that she was pointing out how the devil is so interested in causing brethren, believers in present truth together, to constantly view each other with suspicion, to view each other negatively, to view each other as having negative motives, and all of that. Well, that causes problems. That's the devil's game, but we have to be aware of that and fight against that. Let's not allow the devil to trick us into thinking that our fellow believers are so sinister and are so, worthy of suspicion and all of these things. That's the devil's game. He's been doing it for a very, very long time, trying to turn people against each other. Look at the experience of the disciples. This happened all the time. And so, viewing things right, having the light from our Heavenly Family, the right perception from them come to us, can really help us to not lose friendships that are way more valuable than we might realize. We might build friendships. We might build relationships. Viewing things falsely can be the end of a marriage. It can be the end of a relationship between parents and children, siblings, friends, whatever it may be. And viewing things according to reality, having the right perception, viewing each other in terms of truth, causes you to respond appropriately to people. You can actually help them when they're in need of help. You can actually sympathize with them when they're in need of sympathy. You can reprove them when they're in need of reproof, and do it in the right way. So this is a changed world by viewing things in terms of reality, viewing things as they really are, having a right perception, having light, truth. Other examples of this, there's so many examples in so many areas. When you look at the sciences, whether it's, let's say, we'll start with medical science. Well, there are certain things that simply were not known for a long time, and things that were misperceived. Like if you attach a whole bunch of leeches to someone, it's going to help them to get better, let's say. There are some very rare diseases that actually require someone to have some blood taken from them in order to help them. But that's very, very rarely the case. And that misperception brought about the death of a lot of people. But perceiving things right, understanding how things really work, actually made a big difference. Same thing with many different diseases, which at one point were big issues, and which now, due to modern medicine, are not. And perceiving things right, having a correct understanding of things, brought about that benefit. If you look at technology, gaining an understanding of electricity enabled harnessing of electricity, and gaining an understanding of that enabled, hey, let's funnel this electricity to this direction or to that direction, and we can do different things with it and have amazing results. Well, things had to be viewed as they are. If someone was viewing things in a different way, it's not going to happen. Unless it's just a random fluke, and that might happen every once in a while, where someone acts in accordance with reality by fluke, even if they're viewing things wrong. It's bound to happen. But the reality of it is that it is really important for people to view things as they really are. Let's just say you have a doctor trying to diagnose a patient. Well, having the right diagnosis is so vital. If you think someone has cancer when they really have diabetes, I mean, that's going to be the death of the person, ultimately. Viewing things according to how they really are is so, so important. Understanding the nature of disease is how you can stop it, how you can prevent it, how you can cure it. So this is what we really need to do in all things. Recognize that truth is all there is. It is the most important thing because there is really nothing else other than contrary claims. But that's not going to help us if we don't see things the way they really are. If we see things in a false way, that's not going to help anything. It's going to bring about sin and death. So all of that is a long way to say that, yeah, blindness of eye absolutely is a manifestation of the spirit of falsehood, and a detrimental one at that. But that light and truth are the solution to that. Receiving the message, understanding the principles of reasoning, and, you know, our Heavenly Family has been teaching these principles to us all along. And so that's the solution, the eye salve that Mary was mentioning. Taking it does have to do, of course, Mary, like you were saying, it does have to do with the work of the Spirit of Prophecy, because our Heavenly Family, in giving us these messages, shows us the way. And that's exactly what we're reading in the Damascus document. They were groping around like blind men for the way, and then God raised up for them a teacher of righteousness to guide them in the way of His heart. Well, that just makes sense. You know, that our Heavenly Family would send a message teaching the principles of truth so that people can perceive things as they really are. And that's what Jesus came to do as well. So, any other questions or comments?
What was that other book you mentioned? Comments on?
Are you thinking of the Habakkuk commentary?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, it's no problem. You can look it up. It's in the Giza Vermes translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think it's called Commentary on Habakkuk. And if you look through the table of contents, I'm sure you'll be able to find it.
And also, I was thinking if we view our experience as, you know, we've been led by God all the way, and something new comes and we use our experience to reject it, that's viewing things in the wrong way too.
Yeah, certainly. All right, well, I'm looking at the time here, and we've been on for an hour and 15 minutes, so I'm thinking maybe we should bring the meeting to a close, and then tomorrow night we can see about looking at the next aspect, which is dullness of, let's see how it words it. I kind of went away from the page. Dullness of ear, yes. So, would anyone like to thank our Heavenly Family, and then we'll end the meeting?
I will. Heavenly Family, we thank you for your light and your truth. I thank you for showing us where we are misperceiving things. And thank you for opening up our eyes and giving us eye salve through the Spirit of Prophecy, and thank you for showing us that we're blind, and we just never want to leave your side. I saw a beautiful little video today of a horse running to its owner, so happy, and then the owner put a bridle on the horse and started leading it around, and I just thought that's how I feel, running to you, Heavenly Sister, that you could bridle me and then lead me, and I would be so happy to come to you. And so I just pray that for each one of us, and I thank you for that visual for me today, and I ask your hand of blessing upon all of us, and give us, proper sympathies for each other, especially those that are sick or lonely or in pain. And I pray that you would relieve them. In the name of the branch, he and she. Amen.
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 Amen.